Our story begins not with a roar, but with a quiet arrival. Back in the 1930s, a few unwelcome stowaways hitched a ride on a cargo ship sailing into the port of Mobile, Alabama. These weren't just any insects, they were red imported fire ants, a species native to South America. In their new American home, they found a paradise. The weather was perfect, food was everywhere, and most importantly, the natural enemies that kept them in check back home were nowhere to be found. This tiny invading force began to multiply, spreading silently and steadily, laying the groundwork for an invasion that would soon engulf the entire American South in a creeping, biting wave of red. By the 1990s, this quiet arrival had become a full-blown crisis. The fire ants had conquered an astonishing 346 million acres, a territory larger than many countries. They weren't just a nuisance, they were a destructive force of nature. Their venomous stings felt like tiny needles dipped in fire, posing a serious threat to people, pets, and wildlife. They swarmed and killed newborn calves in pastures and devastated crops in the fields. The economic cost soared into the billions of dollars each year, as communities and farmers struggled to deal with an enemy that seemed to be everywhere at once, turning backyards and farmlands into hostile territory. What made these fire ants so terrifyingly successful was their incredible resilience. Their colonies are not just simple mounds of dirt, they are massive, sprawling underground cities home to hundreds of thousands of individual workers and, crucially, multiple egg-laying queens. People tried everything to stop them. They poured poison down the mounds, set traps, and even tried burning them out, but nothing worked. When faced with a flood, the entire colony would link their legs and jaws together, forming a living, floating raft to ride out the storm. They were a superorganism, an enemy that simply refused to be defeated by conventional means. The situation was desperate. Every traditional method had failed, and the red tide of fire ants continued its relentless advance across the continent. It seemed like an unwinnable war. Scientists and officials were at their wits' end, watching as the ants adapted to every challenge thrown their way. They needed a new strategy, something radical and completely outside the box. They couldn't fight the ants on human terms, they had to find a way to fight them on nature's terms. The search began for a secret weapon, a natural predator that could turn the tide in this epic battle for the American South. After years of searching, scientists found their champion deep in the fire ant's original South American homeland. It was a tiny, unassuming insect, no bigger than a gnat. This was the phorid fly, a creature with a truly gruesome and fascinating life cycle, which earned it the terrifying nickname, the decapitating fly. This fly wasn't just any predator, it was a highly specialized parasite, a natural-born assassin that had evolved for one purpose and one purpose only, to hunt and kill fire ants. For the scientists fighting this desperate war, the discovery of this tiny fly was like finding the perfect key to an unbreakable lock. The way the phorid fly attacks is something straight out of a science fiction horror movie. A female fly will dive bomb a fire ant, and in less than a second she uses a sharp, needle-like appendage to inject a single egg into the ant's body. The ant, completely unaware of its grim fate, goes back to work. But inside, the clock is ticking. The egg soon hatches into a tiny larva, which begins to feed on the ant's internal fluids. This gruesome process doesn't kill the ant, not yet. Instead, the ant is kept alive, turned into a walking incubator for its own killer, a living nursery for the enemy. The real horror begins when the larva makes its move. It migrates from the ant's body up into its head. There, it systematically consumes the ant's brain tissue and the muscles that control its jaws. The ant effectively becomes a zombie, wandering aimlessly while its own mind is being eaten from the inside out. Finally, the larva releases a special chemical, an enzyme that dissolves the delicate membrane connecting the ant's head to its body. The head simply falls off. This severed head now becomes a protective case, a gruesome cocoon where the larva safely develops into an adult fly. Once its transformation is complete, a new phorid fly emerges from the decapitated ant head, ready to continue the cycle of terror. This discovery was a game-changer. Scientists realized they had found a biological weapon that was not only deadly, but also self-replicating. It was a living missile programmed to seek and destroy fire ants. The plan was audacious, to breed millions of these decapitating flies and release them into the wild, unleashing a natural-born killer to do what poisons and traps never could. The war was about to get personal for the fire ants. With their secret weapon identified, the United States Department of Agriculture set up a top-secret facility in Gainesville, Florida. which was essentially a fly factory. Since 1997, this lab has been dedicated to mass-producing phorid flies. To do this, scientists had to become masters of psychological warfare. They kept large colonies of fire ants in a state of constant panic, triggering the release of their alarm pheromones. This scent of fear was irresistible to the phorid flies, creating the perfect hunting ground and encouraging them to lay as many eggs as possible, turning the lab into an efficient assembly line for these tiny assassins. The biological control program, which would last for 30 years, was officially launched. The strategy was called Operation Ant Attack. Teams of scientists would venture into fire ant territory, find a large mound and violently disturb it with shovels or sticks. This would send the ants into a frenzy, pouring out of the nest to defend their home. At that precise moment of chaos, the scientists would open their containers and release the flies. They would unleash anywhere from a few dozen to as many as 20,000 flies at a time, ensuring the panicked ants were easy targets for the dive-bombing predators. This wasn't just a one-time attack. The teams would return to the same colonies over and over, sometimes for weeks, to make sure the flies had a strong foothold. They even developed a Trojan horse method. In the lab, they would expose a group of fire ants to the flies and then release these infected walking time bombs back into their own colonies. These unsuspecting ants would carry the deadly fly larvae deep into the heart of the nest, spreading the parasitic terror from within. It was a clever and insidious plan designed to undermine the ants' greatest strength, their fortress-like colonies. As the war evolved, so did the technology. Realizing that flies alone might not be enough to cover the vast territory, the campaign expanded. Helicopters and drones took to the skies, dropping special poison baits disguised as harmless bits of mulch over huge, inaccessible areas. On the ground, a new type of soldier joined the fight sniffer dogs. These amazing dogs were specially trained to detect the unique scent of a fire ant colony from over 150 feet away, allowing teams to find and target hidden nests with incredible accuracy. This multi-front war combined nature's assassins with modern human ingenuity. One of the most surprising and effective outcomes of the program was not just the number of ants killed, but the psychological impact the flies had on the survivors. The constant threat from above created a reign of terror. Fire ant colonies, once bold and aggressive, became cautious and fearful. At the mere buzz of a phorid fly, entire foraging parties would freeze in place or abandon valuable food sources and retreat to the safety of the nest. This psychological warfare disrupted their dominance, giving smaller, native ant species a chance to compete for food and territory for the first time in decades. The program was a success in establishing the flies in America. By 2011, some species of phorid fly had spread to cover nearly 90% of the fire ants' territory. They created a permanent self-sustaining population of predators, and studies showed they were responsible for a 10 to 15% reduction in fire ant workers in areas where they were established. This may not sound like much, but it was enough to weaken the fire ants' iron grip on the ecosystem, restoring a small but crucial piece of the natural balance. The flies had become a permanent part of the American landscape, forever changing the dynamic of the war. However, after 3 decades of relentless fighting, the ultimate revelation was a sobering one. The fire ants had, in a way, won. Despite the flies, the baits, and the dogs, they still control 346 million acres of land, the same amount, if not more, than when the program began. Their ultimate weapon is their staggering reproductive power. Several times a year, millions of new winged queens take to the sky, each one capable of starting a brand new colony. They can simply outbreed the efforts to control them, replacing their losses faster than the flies and scientists can inflict them. Today, on September 19, 2025, the epic battle continues. The war has settled into a permanent stalemate. Both the invasive fire ant and its mortal enemy, the decapitating fly, are now here to stay. New efforts like facilities to release millions of sterile flies are underway in states like Texas. What this 30-year war taught us is that fighting an invasive species is incredibly complex. You can't always win outright. Sometimes the best you can do is restore a measure of balance, turning an unstoppable invasion into a manageable, ongoing struggle. The bug battle rages on,